My name is Mara Quinn, and I want to be clear about something from the start. I have never fired a weapon. I have never commanded troops. I have never once in my 36 years done anything that a military assessment would classify as combat experience. What I have done is spend 14 years studying why wars start. Not the official reasons, not the declarations, and the manifestos and the formal grievances that get filed in historical records. The actual reasons. The misunderstandings, the miscalculations, the moments where someone on one side of a line made an assumption about someone on the other side that was wrong, and neither side found out until the shooting had already started. I wrote a book about it. It sold poorly. Academics rarely have good timing. 3 weeks ago, my timing got considerably better. The Crethal Dominion had been moving forces into the Harith system for 6 months. Not openly. Officially, they were running extended patrol operations in the outer corridor. Unofficially, every intelligence assessment from every Outer Belt authority agreed that the Crethal were positioning for an annexation of the 3 inhabited Harith colony worlds, home to approximately 400,000 people who had built something worth protecting over 2 generations of hard work on difficult planets. The Harith Colony Authority had been trying to negotiate a withdrawal for 4 months. 4 months of formal sessions, formal rejections, and formal non-answers that all added up to the Crethal running out the clock while their positioning completed. 2 weeks ago, the positioning completed. The Harith Authority sent one final diplomatic request before they were going to ask the Outer Belt Patrol Coalition for military support, which would mean a conflict that nobody wanted but that was running out of alternatives. Someone in the Harith Authority had read my book. They called me. The Crethal negotiator was a senior officer named Commander Veth Doran, and she arrived at the neutral meeting station on Kareth 9 with 3 aides and the particular manner of someone who has already decided how a meeting is going to go and is attending primarily as a formality. She was tall, gray-scaled, with the flat yellow eyes of the Crethal Northern command structure and the kind of stillness that comes from certainty rather than calm. She looked at me across the meeting table with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally unimpressed. The Harith Authority representative introduced me as an independent consultant. Veth Doran's expression did not change, which was itself a kind of communication. The session opened with the standard positions. The Crethal patrol operations were within legal outer belt parameters. The Harith colonies had no authority to request withdrawal of legally operating forces. The question of Harith sovereignty was a matter for established legal process. All of this was technically accurate and completely beside the point, which was the particular kind of argument that worked well for people who were running out the clock and less well for people who were running. The Harith representative made the colony authorities' position clear. The positioning of forces in the Harith system constituted a threat to the colony populations. The colony authority requested immediate withdrawal. Veth Doran said the forces were conducting patrol operations. The Harith representative said the positioning pattern was inconsistent with patrol operations. Veth Doran said the Crethal Dominion's operational decisions were not subject to external review. I asked if I could ask a question. Both sides looked at me. Veth Doran said, "Go ahead," with the tone of someone granting a minor concession. I said I wanted to understand the Crethal Dominion's position on the Harith system specifically, not the legal framework and not the operational rationale, the actual position. What outcome was the Crethal Dominion seeking in the Harith system? Veth Doran said the Crethal Dominion sought stability and security in the outer corridor. I said stability and security were outcomes, not positions. I asked what specific condition in the Harith system was currently preventing stability and security from the Crethal perspective. She looked at me more carefully. She said the Harith system contained navigational infrastructure that had historically been managed inconsistently, creating unpredictability in the outer corridor transit lanes. I said unpredictability in the transit lanes was a logistics problem. I asked whether the Crethal Dominion's concern was with the transit lane specifically or with the Harith colonies themselves. She said the infrastructure that affected the transit lanes was located on the Harith colony worlds. I said so the concern was with the infrastructure management rather than with the colony populations. She said the colony authorities' management of that infrastructure had been the source of the unpredictability. I turned to the Harith representative and asked whether the colony authority had received any formal communication from the Crethal Dominion regarding the transit lane infrastructure before the patrol operations began. He checked his records and said no. I turned back to Veth Doran and asked whether the Crethal Dominion had raised the transit lane infrastructure concern through formal channels before positioning forces in the Harith system. A pause. She said the Dominion had determined that formal channels had not historically produced results. I said with which party specifically, since the current Harith Cole, Oni authority had only been in its present form for 3 years. Another pause, longer. She said the Dominion's experience with prior Harith administrative structures. I said the prior administrative structure had been replaced following a governance reform 2.5 years ago. The current authority was a different body with different leadership. She said the Dominion was not aware of the governance reform. The room was quiet. I said to be clear about what I was hearing. The Crethal Dominion had a specific concern about transit lane infrastructure management that had never been formally communicated to the current Harith Colony Authority. The Dominion had responded to that concern by positioning forces based on their experience with a previous administrative structure that no longer existed. And the current authority, which had never received any communication about the infrastructure concern, had interpreted the force positioning as a territorial threat. Veth Doran said nothing for a long moment. The Harith representative said nothing either, but he was looking at Veth Doran with an expression that had shifted from hostile to something more complicated. I said I wanted to suggest something. I said the transit lane infrastructure concern was a solvable problem. Infrastructure management protocols were the kind of thing that 2 parties negotiated regularly. It was administrative work, not a sovereignty question, and not a military question. I said if the Crethal Dominion was willing to table a formal statement of their specific infrastructure concerns, and if the Harith Colony Authority was willing to engage with those concerns as an administrative matter, the force positioning question might look different in the context of a working infrastructure agreement than it looked right now in the context of no communication at all. Veth Doran looked at the Harith representative. The Harith representative looked at Veth Doran. She said the Dominion was prepared to table a formal statement of infrastructure concerns. He said the Colony Authority was prepared to receive and engage with such a statement. The session that had been scheduled for 2 hours ran for 6. Not because it was difficult. Because once both sides understood what they were actually talking about, there was a great deal of practical work to do. And both delegations were, it turned out, perfectly capable of doing practical work when they were not busy defending positions that were based on misunderstandings. By the end of the session, there was a working group, a timeline, and a preliminary framework for an infrastructure management protocol that both sides considered acceptable. The force positioning question was formally tabled pending the infrastructure agreement. 400,000 people on 3 colony worlds went to sleep that night without knowing how close the morning had come to being different. Oren, the Outer Belt Coalition observer who had been sitting in the corner of the room, taking notes for 6 hours, found me in the corridor afterward. He said, "What just happened?" I said the Cretha had a logistics problem they had never told anyone about. The Harith had a governance reform they had never told anyone about. The Harith had a governance reform they had never side knew what the other side actually wanted. Because neither side had ever asked. He said that was it. I said that was it. He said 6 months of force positioning and 4 months of failed negotiations. I said, and one question about what outcome they were actually seeking. He looked at me. He said, why did nobody ask that question before? I said, because both sides came to the table certain they already understood what the other side wanted. When you are certain you understand something, you stop asking about it. He said, and you were not certain. I said I had read 14 years of wars that started the same way. I stopped being certain about what other people want a long time ago. He was quiet for a moment. He said, your book. I said, yes. He said it sold poorly. I said academic timing is rarely good. He said, I think the timing just improved. Veth Doran passed us in the corridor, on her way to the docking bay. She stopped briefly and looked at me with those flat yellow eyes that were doing considerably more work than they had been doing at the start of the day. She said, Mara Quinn. I said, yes. She said, the governance reform, 2.5 years ago. I said, yes. She said, we did not know. I said, I know. She said, if we had known, I said, things might have gone differently from the beginning. She held my gaze. She said they might have gone differently from the beginning. She held my gaze. She walked to her ship, and I watched her go. And thought about 14 years of studying why wars start, and the particular answer that came up more often than any other. Not greed. Not aggression. Not inevitable conflict between competing interests. Assumption. The assumption that you already know what the other side wants. The assumption that your understanding of a word is their understanding of the same word. The assumption that silence means agreement, and that no communication means no concern. War started in the gap between what people assumed and what was actually there. Closing that gap was not glamorous work. It did not require weapons or fleets, or the kind of courage that got written into history books. It required someone willing to stop and ask what everyone else had already decided they knew. I picked up my bag and booked the next transit back to my office where the second book was waiting, half written, on a desk covered in 14 years of research notes. The timing, I thought, had just improved, considerably.